This episode is sponsored by Armis. Are your medical devices truly secure? Armis allows you to see, protect, and manage every device and asset in your environment, from the most common to the most complex across your health system, medical, IoT, or operational. Reduce risk, ensure compliance, and safeguard patient care with a trusted partner in cybersecurity. Don't leave your devices and your patients exposed. Visit thisweekhealth.com/Armis today to learn more.
Today on Keynote.
If you've got crappy processes and putting a technology on top of crappy processes, nothing good will come. Technology in certain cases can cause more problems than it does good.
I'm Drex DeFord, a recovering healthcare CIO and longtime cyber advisor for some of the world's most innovative cybersecurity companies. Now I'm president of Cyber and Risk at This Week Health and the 229 Project, where we are dedicated to transforming healthcare one connection at a time. Our keynote show is designed to share conference-level value with you every week. Now, let's get started with today's episode. I'm really glad you're here. This is the webinar you've been looking for. We're going to cover security is efficiency, cyber resilience strategies for the future of healthcare. And today's webinar is sponsored by the good folks at Armis. Thank you, Armis. I'm Drex DeFord. I'm your host today, the Cyber and Risk guy at This Week Health and the 229 Project. And if you would hang in there with me, we're going to give folks a couple of minutes to show up late because it seems like that's just the way things work today. Everybody's on a little bit of a late clock. Meeting ran over, had to hit the bathroom, all those things. So I want to give everybody a couple of minutes to get here, and we'll get the webinar underway just shortly. For those of you who already joined us, thanks for being here. Thanks for submitting questions for the webinar when you're registered. We have a few of them. And just as a reminder, you can submit additional questions anytime during the webinar through the webinar sidebar. There's a Q&A tab for that. I have James Bowie from Tampa General as one of our panelists. He's the CISO there. And I'll ask you guys to do a quick intro here in a couple of minutes. But while we're waiting for folks to join, here's a goofy question. I'll start with you, James, and Mick. I'll do a quick intro on you here in just a minute. You've been in IT for a while. What was your first computer?
First computer I would call mine holy as my precious was a 386 SX in all 16 megahertz of its glory.
Ooh.
And it's been a downhill experience with computers since then.
Is it because you could get your hands inside and do stuff in there?
Do it all and it was just I remember just the wonder of like being in DOS and being in the BIOS and what does this do? And oops, I just fried that. Let's do that again,
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Buying cards and switching out cards. Also with us is Mick Coady, the CTO at Armis, who's also on the panel. Mick, same question. What was your first computer?
Commodore 64 with the tape drive. So there was the original that I kind of had. In school, we had the Apple IIes, if you remember those. I did an original version of Basics when that was back in the early 80s. And that's how I kind of got my start. But just like Jim, it was kind of easy to kind of navigate what you were doing. I mean, I don't know what versions later on after we got into the late 80s, early 90s, we started getting into DOS way more harder. So it was interesting how that worked out.
Yeah, that is the correct answer. Commodore 64. That was my first machine too, with a tape drive plugged into a little black and white TV, I think, if I remember right. Well, it's a couple of minutes after. We're going to go ahead and start. As I said earlier, this is the webinar, Security is Efficiency, Cyber Resilience Strategies for the Future of Healthcare, sponsored by Armis. I'm Drex DeFord, the longtime recovering healthcare CIO. Now I'm the cybersecurity and risk leader at This Week Health and the 229 Project. I will be your moderator. And in the virtual room with me here are a couple of friends and a pair of folks who can really get into that connection between better security and better operational efficiency. If you tuned in early, you know what their first computer was. Welcome to the podcast, James and Mick.
Good to see you again, Drex.
Again, to the audience, thanks for being here and thanks for submitting questions when you registered. And of course, thanks again to Armis for sponsoring this. And a quick thanks to Holly, our producer, for keeping us on the straight and narrow, because webinars don't happen without the magical person in the background, and that's Holly. So let's do some quick introductions. Jim, why don't you go first?
All right, I'm Jim. I'm the CISO at Tampa General Health System. I've been here for about 2 years. I was at Moffitt Cancer Center before that. And then I was actually at Tampa General Health System before that in a couple different roles. And prior to that, I was in law enforcement.
And there's some great stories Jim has about law enforcement. Can't tell them on the air here, but you should ask him about the goat story at some point if you are able to run across him. Mick's already choked up on this. Hey, Mick, introduce yourself.
Yep, Mick Coady. I am the CTO and provide executive oversight for the healthcare delivery organization here at Armis. I just celebrated my 2-year anniversary on May 1st. I am a former retired partner from PwC. I have spent about 2/3 of my career with KPMG, Deloitte, and PwC, so I've been in the consulting side of the world. So I just recently joined Armis to come in and help them kind of focus an awful lot more on working in the healthcare space. I've been working in that space for well over 20 years, been in the IT and cyberspace for close to 30 years.
You also have a really interesting background. And if you ever get the chance to sit down with Mick, that's another thing you should ask him about. He has a long and storied history, including some amazing combat experience. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for your service, both of you, and appreciate you being on the webinar. Jim, I'm going to start with you on some questions. We'll just kind of get started. First of all, we were just in Boston together at the 229 Project CISO Summit. How'd that go for you?
Well, that was my second one, and I absolutely love them. It is the best download of information you can have. You're there with 10 to 15 other CISOs in healthcare, same challenges, same issues. How are they solving it? How are you solving it? You can see what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. You come back energized. You make connections forever. It's just an amazing experience. I highly recommend it to anyone who can do it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. In that conversation, it's clear that Tampa General has come a long way in a fairly short amount of time. And I know that efficiency is one of those things you're always looking for in the solutions that you implement. When you first started and came into this, I mean, you have a good story about signing the letter and immediately getting a call. What did you do? How did you assemble like the list of problems and prioritize, and just how did you get started?
So before I was in law enforcement, I was actually an EMT. And I think that actually lays well into being a CISO or running a cyber team, especially in the middle of an incident. And the first thing you got to do is triage. And to do that, I had to figure out what I had. Asset discovery was the first on our list, and then asset exposure on top of that, once you had the assets. And then from there, you triage like, well, this is the biggest risk. This I need to address. This is where we need to coordinate our efforts. Rallied all of IT. I had to, with that asset discovery, did figure out what leaders, what servers belong to what leaders, and hey, you're responsible for this, and now here's where I need all of you to focus your efforts on this and this. And it was really good. The organization came around very quickly and was very helpful. So we were able to remediate a bunch of hygiene issues very quickly with the help of Armis, actually, in helping us discover all the things we had out there.
How's the efficiency part tie into this, from both the IT operations efficiency, but clinical efficiency too?
Yeah, so if you just look at a list of your assets and what their vulnerabilities are, or just a list of your assets and what you have to do, you will go insane. I think every one of us can look at a dashboard and say, oh, we have 100,000 of this issue, right? And you're just like, oh God, what do we do? That's where the triage part comes into it. That's where the vendors or your tools can help you lay out like this right here. This is your main problem. Like you have this exposure. Now, when it comes to operational efficiency, they can also do things where they may think they're out of IV pumps, or they may think they don't have enough bladder scanners. And you can be like, no, guys, you'll have 15 of them. You don't need, like, I can see them. They've been sitting there. No one's using them. Right. So there's a couple 100,000 for you. There's some efficiency on that front. That helps you become an ally at that point too.
It's amazing how good. I'm married to a nurse, so I know this, and my own time as a recovering CIO, it's amazing how good the clinical staff is at sometimes hiding things that they want to make sure that they have access to when they need it. And so it gets so well hidden, no one else can find it.
They're great squirrels. They're really good at it. Yeah.
Mick, you're in the field every day. And one of the things I love when we sit down and talk is that you have so much great experience because you spend so much time with so many different people at different health systems. There's a lot of security tools. A lot of organizations have never met a tool they didn't like or want to buy. What have you seen on the efficiency front? How are healthcare orgs driving efficiencies and operations?
There's a lot of different things that go into that, right? And obviously, I wouldn't say I've lost my objectivity coming over to a specific company. Obviously, Jim, happens to be a client and working with us in different areas, but he does push us to the gamuts of what we want to do when it comes to how we address effectiveness operationally. But so I would say it's effectiveness and efficiency sometimes that you're gaining for both. But, he was talking about certain things. I think what's very interesting is watching how, and you and I have done a couple of dinners recently where I've thrown this out as a kind of a random question, which is our friends in procurement, right? Where do they stand? Like Jim had just kind of alluded to. I find it very interesting that like when it comes to IT and med device type procurement lifecycle or asset management in general, where we sit in the chasm of what we're supposed to be doing to supply to that. So I would say there's one aspect of operational efficiency that can be gained there. One that definitely has cost ramifications, right? We were talking about that from a perspective. My eldest daughter is a nurse also, and I've asked these questions. She's on a med surge floor at night, and she's doing these things, and I've told Jim this too. And it's just it's kind of funny. We keep the good ones in the closets, right? And I'm going like, what? I go like, what are the good ones? And it's just this kind of conversation that clinical people on the floors have these conversations, and it's kind of interesting. So when you're looking at it, that's just the way it is. But I think what it is getting the injection of getting aligned with your financial office, either the comptroller, the CFO, or all those people in general around accounts payable and procurement in general, and getting them to the same room and saying, hey, look, before we go to spend another $1 million on this and this, why are we doing that? Right. I found 8 of these on an ICU floor. I found another 4 down on the ER. We have over 12 or 13 of these things before we go spend $1.2 million on more infusion pumps. Why don't we make sure that we saw these things 6 months ago when they came online? Now there's only 24 of them. Where are the other 14? Or where are the other 13 of these, right? So it's definitely part of that conversation. The other thing too, when it comes to, is Jim alluded to this also, is how do we start creating levels of automation around remediation, right? And organizing that more effectively. If I'm not saving you time, saving you money, or reducing your aperture of risk, why are you acquiring a tool in general? And I can still go back to my big 4 consultative more hat that I would wear still. I still wear predominantly 99% of the time, which is I'm asking basic questions of around that, right? Why do you even want something like what we do, or even some of our network components of our relationship partners that we have with endpoints and all these other pieces? How do we get to that point of driving operational efficiency, but also driving better cost, outcomes? And then ultimately, from what Jim was saying, how do we get, fingers out of the pie and create levels of automation on how we go about fixing things and kind of shifting left and close the remediation gap timelines that seem to they always falter in that area. So that's where I definitely feel like I want to push and help and work more effectively, either through consulting workflow, putting a technology on top of that consulting workflow that is going to be good. But if you've got crappy processes and putting a technology on top of crappy processes, Jim and I have had this conversation numerous times, nothing good will come. Technology in certain cases can cause more problems than it does good. So that's kind of like the bigger, sphere of what I tend to spend my time talking to health systems about.
It's interesting. There was a lot in there. We talk often about, taking technology and putting it on top of a process that is a train wreck, just gets you a really fast and efficient train wreck. And that really isn't what any of the technology projects that we're doing is trying to accomplish. Jim, there was a lot there that Mick talked about. One of them, part of it was tied to your procurement team and the conversations around procurement. Tell me how you have used technology to help them be better at their jobs when it comes to acquiring more assets when maybe more assets are needed.
The first step to that is hopefully you can get ingrained with your contract people, because if you can stop before anybody signs anything, you can be much more effective and much better ally than after someone's already signed a check and they're coming to you like, hey, I want to put this widget on your network. And you're going to be like, I don't think so, Scooter.
So in the workflow process of something being submitted to be procured, you're in the gap there. You're in the line of approval before it gets to the actual sign the contract stage.
Yeah, and if you've gotten into that, not only do you get to strengthen your cybersecurity posture because you can interject things in the contract that you want in there, and the vendor has to meet these requirements, but at the same time, your GRC team, which is the team that does it on our side, becomes so intimately familiar with everything that's in the organization. They're going to be like, hey, why are we buying more spoons when we have spoons? And it's not your job to be the police, but then you can go to procurement and be like, hey guys, y'all know you already have a spoon. You don't need this spoon. You have a spoon right here, right? Yeah, so that helps you become an ally to procurement. Then they get more engaged and make sure when someone comes to them with a project, they'll say, have you talked to cyber yet and gotten a clearance? Because it's a good feedback loop. the more you help them, the more likely you are to get buy into your security process and your assessment process.
There's two things there too that I'm going to ask you a little bit more about. One of them is as you get into that process, you see things that are coming and you're able to take a look at it from a security perspective. There's certainly efficiencies there, right? That mean there's not something bought and then you have to figure out how to retrofit everything else that you have to make it work and be more secure, right? That's part of it.
Yep. It doesn't always work. They don't, I mean, we're not perfect. There's still some VPs get happy and sign things without even talking to contracts. We have to work with that. So you have to be quick on your feet. But yeah, it definitely helps with efficiency, and it helps. Your board loves it because now you're helping save money, and your CFO is a big fan of that, from what I hear.
Mick, you're looking at not only at the number of assets that you have that an organization has on their network and connected to their network, but you're looking also at like how those things are used, right? That's also a great opportunity for efficiency improvement.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that play in this space around asset visibility that look at the quality of what you're doing with the asset, right? So I would say there is a huge challenge that's put towards us and many in our space to provide utilization levels of information, right? So if you're using what you're using on a set of pumps that are sitting on a clinical floor, what are they being used for, right? What is the consistency of them, whether it's, being used for morphine drip or you're using for this? What do the drug libraries look like? How do we organize some of those pumps more effectively to be used in a consistent way? Some of them are going to be much greater degrees of utilization than others are. How do you manage that disparity, right? In the imaging space, that happens as well. It's not uncommon to see that you may have 6, 7, 8 CT imaging type, machines sitting across the network. We can quickly determine, okay, hang on a second. You're at almost 80% capacity on 4, if not even 90%. But over here, these other 3 or 4 are not even barely at 10%. What's going on? Why is there such a disparity? So yeah, I mean, that has to come back. I mean, we've only started that journey recently with Jim, but I know a lot of us who play in the space and an awful lot of our clients are coming back to this and asking, okay, that's a very effective use of both of our time and of the effectiveness of what you're doing with the quality of what you're kind of bringing us to the data front. We need to take this back to the Chief Medical Information Officer, the CMO, and go like, hey, we might want to rethink how we're doing imaging. Right, we may want to maybe break it down by body sort. Would it be interesting to take a look at it? And if we were not having to rotate the patient every 30 to 45 minutes as you move them from one section of their body to another, what if we allocated machines to a particular body type? So when you're scheduling the CT imaging of the day, which tends to be very long, elongated kind of a process, right? Do I look at head and shoulder? Do I look at thoracic? Do I look at hip? Do I look at knee? Do I look at ankle? How do I break down the functions of it? And do I allocate the boxes that way? We've seen people kind of take the data and kind of run with it that direction, or maybe it's based upon location. Maybe we need to focus on specific parts of the community that allows this specific type of imaging to occur over here versus everything else. So that absolutely has become a very interesting part. It's a byproduct of what we do through visibility, but it is absolutely, we have enormous clients across the country that are asking for that. And I'm sure they're asking our peers in this space as well. Like, there's a huge community of us that want to do the right thing by our clients. We're not the only ones doing this by any standards, but that's the kind of the new entree into what people are expecting from traditional visibility versus really pushing the gamuts of what you want to do for utilization on the asset.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great connection to the clinical folks. And I want to remind folks who are with us, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to pop over into the chat and ask your question, and we will build those up. Holly's going to keep me squared away, our producer, and we'll ask your questions a little bit later in the webinar. Jim, kind of down the same path, it's great to know what you have and what patch level it's at and how much it's used. Are your clinical engineers pulled into this too? Are they part of this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. Every device we get, we tag to a team, right? So it's not only just clinical engineers, but all of IT. And so what helps us from a cyber incident perspective, when we're seeing something weird or, a imaging machine's reaching out to Russia for some reason, now we can very quickly figure out where to go and who to talk to. It's like, hey, did you know this X-ray? Is that normal for it to talk to Madagascar? And normally the answer is no. But a lot of times before we had good asset management and discovery and could see that traffic, we would have to scramble for a while because most organizations, yes, and just the ones I've been at too, are not great at tying an asset to a team that knows it or an excerpt. So as a cyber team, you're running around trying to find SMEs or subject matter experts about this thing. And because we're tagging that as it goes through every device that gets profiled, now we know exactly who to call. And what is this? And they're like, nope, shut that down. We're good. Also, more important, talking about like from a resilience perspective, that's great that a machine could be talking to Madagascar. That is a cyber threat, theoretically, but you're not going to shut it down if said machine is attached to a human at the time, right? You
Right.
don't want to shut down a ventilator or some sort of cancer treatment product. So then you've got to get on the phone or on the horn with somebody in the unit you're at if you've done your location tagging correctly and pulled it in through wherever it's at and be like, hey, can I shut this down? Because we'll deal with the cyber threat or even just the IT issue, but we don't want to cause an adherent event on a patient or hurt somebody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, so let's go down the resilience path here a little bit. How do you define it at Tampa General, and how does it affect your decisions around how you're managing assets and prioritizing work and creating efficiencies?
So there's a couple of things to that, and I'm going to segue out of healthcare for a second. I have a friend who works cybersecurity for a large grocery chain, and whenever they have an event, one of the leaders gets on and says, well, can we still sell green beans? Right? And that's like the best way to look at resilience from our perspective is, well, can we still treat people? Can we still provide the help we need to help? And that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Our definition of resilience is, can we meet diverse and critical challenges while letting operations continue to flow and treat the patients and treat the customers, because if they're the most important thing. And if we can do it in a way that they don't even know something's happening, that's like the top level, like you're at the top of whatever pyramid you want to call that, right? If you do it with a little bit of interruption, okay. And when you get into downtimes, that's when you no longer have resilience. So really, a quick definition of it is, can we still treat people effectively and safely? And however IT would fold into that.
Even if the capacity is somewhat degraded or changed. Mick, you and I have talked about this a bit in the past. We continue to move from this security model that is, deeper, wider moats and taller castle walls into a model that's way more around detect, respond, remediate. How have you seen organizations build speed into the new model so that they can catch this stuff, as Jim sort of talked about, catch this stuff, kill it, so that for end users, it's like nothing's ever happened?
Yeah, I think some of that goes back to the influx of how you manage all of the different tool sets that people are using, right? We're just like one of, several that Jim has to manage through and everything else that goes into it. So when you look at this, it's how do you effectively build that chain together that gives you the information at an expedient level that allows you to make these decisions quickly, right? So some of the other parts and pieces of what we're finding too is, how do we get out ahead of even CVE scoring, right? One of the aspects of what we're doing around the threat intel space around, okay, fine, we know that ISI.exe, 18 months ago was a 3, today it's an 8. Well, how many devices do I have today that are going to get impacted by that, right? And Jim alluded to this kind of in a different way, which is also which group of human beings are also associated with that, right? So from a different perspective, I think we see this as a different perspective of assigning the roles out. Like cyber ops sends to all the stuff falls right down back onto our shoulders every single time when we're trying to do this bit of work. But what actually should be happening is that we're able to span the work out to the right individuals. There's no one in cyber ops going to go out and jump on and grab a USB stick and go update, an infusion pump, right? That has to happen with the cleaner, the biomed squads, or what they do. Network infra has to have a role. Endpoint has to have a role. All these people have to have a role when it comes to taking care of images or all these parts and pieces. So when you look at resiliency, I think what has changed from it's all cyber ops and it's all of our problem and it all always falls onto our thing and then we redistribute everything back out. It's now you're operating as a completely different style of a unit where everyone's already involved together. And basically we already know where the roles are because to his point, we know who's communicating to that asset on a regular basis. I know that these 3 clinicians through 3 different sets of shifts are using, these are the most consistent set of identities that are doing that. Okay, so therefore, if anything, does not map to that heuristically, then if that deviates, well, okay, that's cutting it off much earlier in the chain of the snake going like, okay, that does not look like it's abnormal. Hey, let's isolate this or right click ACL, let's block, hold for a second. And that level of intelligence is where we're trying to get to. And I believe in certain cases, we're getting to that. I know we're definitely producing some of that and Jim is pushing us again to the edges to kind of get to that, so to shut it off before it even begins. But I think as a community, that's where we've got to kind of get back to it. And I know, there's been recent conversations around where the CVE scoring is going, what CVEs are doing in general. those are also written, 8, 9, 10 months post them even
Sure.
used, right? So how do we get out ahead of it, right? And from that perspective, and the last thing I'll throw back into the operational parts of which we're talking about, I think what's forgotten along the way is when you have a patient through admittance and discharge, right? The glass opens, right? The doors open, they head through how do you monitor that asset control flow that happens with the patient, right? Through discharge. And I think what gets lost, and recently I've had different conversations with CMOs and CMIOs, where the air conditioning system, if that simple thing, there's a PLC that's faulty on an air conditioning system, that takes down a surgery center up and down for a 6-week period. How much revenue do you think is going to be lost when you're doing that? We don't necessarily think about it in the traditional cyber resilient thing, but I will tell you, it's not uncommon for a CMIO recently to kind of hand me my rear end and remind me of my consultative background, which is I run a hospital. I'm looking at operational resiliency. Cyber is just one part of it, right? I need to run a hospital to keep it up and going. You're a part of that. But if you've got the ability to provide me asset visibility into a PLC failing on a train air conditioning system, I need to know that, right? That's going to impact how I run my surgery center today. And it's just something to keep in the back of your mind.
It's great additional insight. And it's kind of the multifaceted benefit of some of these kinds of tools like ARMIS. The benefit to facilities, the benefit to clinical engineering, the benefit to IT, the benefit to IT operations too, because I know there are times that the IT operators, James, also wheel around and ask questions about, we're having this problems. Can you tell me anything about what you might know why we're having this problem? Yeah, you see that from time to time too.
Yeah, the best part about a cyber program, and this helps you align and get more funding for your tools or whatever it is you need to do, or even just an infrastructure alignment. We join, everybody should, but we join any of the downtime issues before they're even issues. If someone's troubleshooting, we're happy to help because you are the collective intelligence hub for an entire IT organization. If you're running your cyber program to the ability that you can, obviously some people get stuck politically or funded wise, but if you able to successfully deploy these tools and collect the data you should be collecting, you are the best source of intelligence, not just for cybersecurity, but for data flow, uptimes, issues with equipment. You're the canaries.
You know everything about everything now.
Yeah. So if you want to get collaboration quickly and or funding to your environment, start helping them out, give them access. There's in every one of these tools that I can think of, there is a way to give IT access without giving them information, the sensitive information, so they can't see what the CEO is surfing or whatever. But you can give them the information that they can go in and start troubleshooting things as well. There's a bunch of cyber tools that you can watch every network hop and see exactly where the issue is very quickly. And now in an industry where not only is minutes millions, but patient health and safety is at stake, because when you reduce efficiencies for operations, they make mistakes, right? And so if they get off their game because things aren't working as normal, that's when humans make mistakes across any industry. The problem is when they make mistakes, people can get hurt.
Right.
So if you can reduce that with just IT downtime reduction and quicker response at that speed, you end up becoming this huge ally within IT. And now you're a helper and not just a bunch of no bots, or you can't go there, or you can't do this. And you want to talk about speed too, and I'll get you this article I read late last night. There was a group, they released a CVE, CVEs get published ahead of time, not the results, but like the number and like a subject, right? They found a CVE, went to the product, asked the AI to analyze the product with the CVE, and the AI is like, oh yeah, here's the vulnerability they must have found. And now before the vendor has a chance to publish or do anything, the AI has figured out the problem. Now you have a true 0-day without a patch. Talk about needing to be ahead of your environment for watching, not just for known things, but for behavioral issues and equipment. Like that's what scares me and keeps me up at night.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the bad guys are doing the same thing, right? They're looking at those CVs as they're released. They're using AIs to find the potential problem, and then they're using the AI to build the weaponization package to take advantage of that too. So the more you know about your network, the more you know about everything that's on your network and where it's at and who's supposed to be talking to it. I mean, realistically, this is all part of zero trust approach. Let's not call it zero trust, because for some reason it just has it's one of those words that, people click out maybe when you start talking about it in some environments, but that idea of that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, it got buzzworded to death, which is a shame because it ultimately leads to micro segmentation, which leads to more responsibility. Ultimately, what you're doing is you're assigning responsibility to the people who actually need it to get their work done, but it also builds them into the collective, what Jim said about the intelligence of it. And that's the thing, right? You look at what we look at from intelligence or threat intel feeds or all these other kind of things, that it's not just having a vulnerability, and according to a CVE, it's a vulnerability. How much is it being exploited?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
The exploitation of that is what actually matters. So if it's a tree and it's doing what it's doing and it's a, it's a CVE, but if it's not being exploited and it doesn't jump to an 8 because the exploitation is not occurring, do you really need to go do something with the 2,824 devices that I have that have a tree? Or do you just leave them there in a parked community, knowing that may escalate, and when I'm ready to take care of it, I may have to write a different ACL to manage that going forward? And that's the better intelligence, and that's the better and more quote unquote use of your time with your team, instead of them chasing whack-a-moles all day long and everything's red all the time and screen fatigue occurs. And then, things get missed. That's when the things get missed and things start to get left behind.
When you know what you've got and you can come up with the mitigating circumstance. I mean, it kind of rolls back to the idea that it's a lot of patching if you do it, but you don't necessarily have to do it depending on how you're managing that inventory.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
In a similar vein, I want to make the switch to the idea of the organization going through transformation initiatives. And as they do new things and they want to do new things, how are they coming to you and talking about operational efficiency improvements?
So I'm going to take a step back to that. In order for the operational non-IT/non-cyber people to even want to have that conversation with you, you have to teach them the importance of cybersecurity. And if you teach it to them in a frame of, here's how you can help the organization, they may or may not care, right? Just humanity. But if you teach them how to be good cyber stewards at home, that same behavior is what you need at work. So if you get the buy-in at home and they realize, oh, I shouldn't store passwords in browsers. I shouldn't store, my dog's name as the same password in every site. And they'll carry that over into your environment. And now they're healthy. They realize how dangerous it is and how easy it is. And then they'll start to involve you much sooner, right? Which is what we're talking about there. And as they're getting into projects, you're there to say, all right, well, I like it. Good idea. I'm not a yes or no on that. But have we thought about this is the issues that could arise from an exposure factor? And what we use is a risk quantification method at that point, right? To be like, you can make this business decision, but just know it puts us at this much risk in dollar signs. They don't care about CV numbers, and they don't care, what a LLM&R attack is, or passing the hash, stealing tickets, or whatever. They don't really care. I mean, they care about the outcome, but not how it works. So if you can tell them, hey, that thing you want to do exposes us here and exposes us by this much money. Everybody speaks money. No, it's just how it works. And by doing that, you've now helped them make better decisions. You're not just the no-bot again. You're now an ally. Like, here's the 2 or 3 paths we can take, and here's how much risk that exposes us to. And usually they'll come to the same decision you want them to, but they'll think it's their idea, which is the real trick.
How did you get there? I mean, it was a really interesting conversation in Boston as you sort of talked about the risk quantification and the way that you do the math around these things, and you're able to actually give them a number. Here's the probability, and here's how much it would cost if this many records were exposed. And, this is what you're signing up for. I mean, I think it's a great approach to this because you are speaking a common language that everyone has. How did you come around to this idea?
Actually, I got to credit Dan Holland, who's one of my deputy CISOs. And I was having a conversation with him, and I was like, the way we do metrics as CISOs is really bad. Like, we go in front of these boards and we talk about mean time to triage and mean time to resolve, which are great numbers for CISOs and cyber ops to run. That's how I fly the plane, right? They don't need to know the altitude of the plane. They just need to know that you're getting them to Albuquerque safely. So I was like, what's a better way to talk about this? And he talked about FairCam. It's an open source standard. There's other ones too. We're not going down one method or another that's more viable or not. But at the end of the day, you're running simulations on, you may run the simulation 10,000 times. You get a probability curve. We're going to get into some nerdy math on that. I'll try not to do that. But you get a likely outcome. And believe it or not, your board, your CFO, anybody who's been through an MBA program should understand all of that language.
Sure.
And
The
get
Monte
there.
Carlo simulation language and all of that. They've all heard it before.
Right.
Yeah.
Some cyber people, their eyes might be rolling in the back of their heads, but speak their language, people. You'll get much better results than trying to get them to speak yours. There's third-party software that'll do it. You can do it yourself. You can get really micro with it if you want. One thing we did is we had an imaging system that was out there and we just couldn't get traction on patching it. I couldn't get traction. Finally, we just, on that imaging system, we said, that imaging system is exposing us to $7 million worth of risk. Can you please patch your system? And I sent that to all the VPs. And when the next day, they're like, hey, we actually don't even need that system anymore. But it was a fight up until that point, right? So now you've just mitigated that risk. You can go in front of your board and be like, we were at, making these numbers up, in case any lawyers are watching, we were at $50 million of risk, and now we're at $25 million of risk. Like, it's just a measurable amount. And you got to be transparent with them. That number can go up and down, because let's say we buy a certain product of, cat collars or something, and it turns out they have a CVE all of a sudden that comes up. Now your risk is higher. So it's not a static number, but there's a lot to it, and we could talk for hours. And I can summon Dan in here. If I say it 2 more times, he'll pop into the room next time. But it takes a while, but it's well worth it. You get the board, when I started shifting them off of that, the board was just ate it up. And one of the things I had to get there was talking about survivorship bias. And here's the metrics you're used to seeing that CISOs give you. I'm not downplaying those metrics. They're important to run your cyber operations program, but the board does not give a rat's about it. Their eyes roll in the back of their head. They don't care about all these different things you're showing them. There's 2 metrics I show them. One is the reduction in risk, or what our risk score is with quantification. And the other, and this is based on, actually, I'll step back. I told them about survivorship bias. For those who haven't seen it, I show my team this. I show the board this. There's that picture of the plane in World War II, and it's got all the red dots all over it, where that's all the planes that landed and where they were getting hit. And the military's like, well, where do we put armor? And they reached out to a statistician named Abraham Wald, and he's like, no, you want to put armor where you don't see anybody landing, where there's nothing hit, because that's what inside the engine, your pilot, like this dot matrix.
Yeah, your initial reaction is to say, well, if that's where all the bullets are going, we should put armor there. But the reality is completely upside down from that kind of initial thinking. Yeah.
Those are the ones that made it home. So you need to focus where you're not getting the bullets hit. Cyber operations teams are really bad about doing the same thing with their metrics. The way to survive that is to simulate an attack. Get a third party to do a purple team. You can call it a threat assessment. You can call it whatever you want. Have them take 4 threat actors, go after your environment, give them a computer, give them a server, do your worst, see, back to detect, respond, remediate, see how quickly you can detect it, how quickly you can respond. And that's the metric I give them. Like, it took us, in these simulations, we were able to detect 80% of them. We were able to respond to 70%, again, making up the numbers. And we were able to remediate all of those that we found and compare it to everyone else. And as long as that bar is growing up, they're going to have confidence in you. And then from there, you turn that into risk quant and say, this is our exposure based on that.
It's really interesting. I mean, your analogy too of like flying airplanes, and what do the people in the back of the plane want to know versus what do the people in the front of the plane need to know? Right. Hundreds of dials and switches and knobs and readings. But the folks in the back of the plane just want to know we're landing safely and we're landing on time and we're taking off on time. And that's all I really want to know. And I'll dig into it with you. We can talk about tire pressure later if we need to, but right. Yeah. Mick, you see a bunch of folks talking about the same stuff. Does Jim have a unique approach to doing this, or are you seeing a lot of folks thinking about risk quantification in that way?
I would say, to Jim's credit, he's further ahead than others. There are others that are definitely doing something very similar, but I would say from the risk quantification, he's using all of the inputs correctly to get to a monetary thing. So coming back from the old Big Four days, that's what the board want to know. And to be honest with you, he's correct. They want to know something in English. And again, it falls into what I had talked about earlier. Are you saving me time? Are you saving me money? Or are you changing my risk aperture? And if you're changing my risk aperture, show me how you're doing that. But I don't want to know, just as like he said, from a perspective, and I have an aviation background as well. I don't need to know what's going on with the ACAR system in the cockpit. I don't need to know what's happening with the people. Just need to know, okay, are you on time? Are you not on time? Sometimes it's just down to, if you look at the way the airlines use their own metrics, right? They're measured on time arrival or not on time. It's not a huge set of metrics that they're gauged on when you look at the stars of it. So yes, I know of 2 or 3 other larger institutions that are kind of tracking down the same methodology, what they're doing for quantification. But I would simply say Jim's kind of appropriateness of what he's doing to tie fiscal components to it definitely is the way you change it. And he's definitely further ahead than someone that I've seen. Now, there are plenty that are catching up and doing it the same way, but I like the style of how he's got to it. By the way, there is a Q&A kind of thing that popped up in there. I don't know if Jim and I want to take a stab at that one.
Thanks for bringing that up. How does this solution, and I think they're talking about Armis here, how does this solution complement or conflict with the task management happening through ServiceNow or other enterprise-wide workflow systems? So yeah, Mick, take a shot at that.
Well, both Jim and I can talk to this, but basically what it does from a complementary perspective is, particularly when it comes to orchestration, I'm an ITIL Foundation guy, so I can talk to this from a traditional service management perspective. But if you look at the workflow of traditional asset management and how it's managed within ServiceNow, it is basically the other source of truth that needs to be run in parallel, that generally in any one of, not just from an Armis perspective, all of us who sit in this space, we run a secondary source of truth that is basically complementary part of the system or product that you would buy from anybody. What it does, though, that's very different is it allows you to automate the remediation function. So one of the things that has occurred, and we all have bidirectional flow functions that go to ServiceNow. One, we're capturing the asset information. I would say ServiceNow, the ITOM module is a good module. It does what it does, but it's also very clunky when it comes to doing discovery. You'll find that the people who play in this particular space when it comes to med device, OT, and IT in a hospital system, we can fill out the apertures of detail down to layer 7, whereas ServiceNow will struggle to deal with that. So the complementary overlap is, one, we can fill out the fields in enormous amounts of detail that we feed directly into that CMDB. But then onward going is when we find these vulnerabilities, we find these issues that need to be remediated, we create a ticketing workflow and orchestrate how that remediation occurs and how we shift it left to expedite what happens. ServiceNow doesn't exactly do it that way. They have their own little Volman kind of a management function of what they do within their own profile, but it doesn't orchestrate a workflow the way that creates automation or keeps the human fingers out of it. I don't know if you want to add more to that, Jim, or not, but.
Yeah, one, Mick is absolutely the man to talk through with that. Like anybody could sit down to him and talk through workflow, and exactly like just listening to, he's way more articulated about it than I am, but I'll do it in a simple Georgia boy, like my take on the situation. I have Internet Explorer. I want to get rid of it. I'm in the product. I click a campaign, show me all the computers in Internet Explorer. I hit a button. It sends a ticket to every IT team that has an app or a server with Internet Explorer on it. It's constantly watching it. As they're patching it, it's seeing the tickets are closed. It's saying, yes, that's good. Because believe it or not, IT will just close tickets without remediating an issue sometimes. So we open it if it needs to, right? And it's just, your team is not sitting there all day being like, hey, where are we with this? Where are we with that? Where's this one? It's constantly updating. And it's a huge automation and process efficiency gain. And I would just defer to Mick to actually explain how it works, because again, it blows my mind, whatever they're doing with it. So
Love it. That's a winner. Thanks, George Pappas, for that question.
Yeah, thanks.
I get another question this was from the registration bucket, kind of a little, not totally off topic, but people are wondering, what GRC tool do you use, Jim?
a bunch, actually. Excel is the main one. Microsoft? No, I kid. There is a big part of it. But we use CyberSaint, Safe, Process Bolt, and believe it or not, and Mick might roll his eyes at this, Armis we consider a GRC tool, and we actually pump the information we get into Armis into those tools, and they're helping us keep track of the risk exposure based on it. And we can go in and start running our maturity models based on it, and based on, do we have the right protections? You pick in this CSF area, say, hey, what's my exposure? And we're mapping that to the Armis data we're getting. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff. Is basically, I could talk about that for a couple hours. Whoever that was, if they want to have a call later, we can run through it.
That's great. I appreciate that. Last question for Jim. Given limited resources, how do you go through the process of prioritizing security investment decisions?
There's two things I do. One, my team asks me if they want a product. They go through it, they buy the product. I then go back and make sure they've logged into that product after 6 months. And then it goes away if they haven't, right? Mm-hmm. That's the easiest litmus test if you're dealing with a certain budget. The other part is we use the risk quant, honestly, but it's from a different perspective. We'll use Internet Explorer or TLS, or you have something using SSL version 2 or something. I don't know. If you have an issue, it's more issue based. So my issue, and I don't have this issue, but let's pretend like I have an issue where we're still not even on TLS in an environment or somewhere. That is a major, I assign a risk quant to that. It's like that exposes us to this much risk. I line up all my issues and I find the biggest chunk of money that I can de-expose, right? Or remediate. And it's just triage. And we start with the big chunks. Now, I don't want this to sound like a commercial. Armis has that built in too on their remediation, not the quantitative part of it from a dollar perspective, but they actually will score all your stuff from not just a CVE score, but from this is actually being attacked. We recommend this stuff score. And it's pretty much, if I risk quant that, it matches up like line for line.
So then it kind of self-builds your ROI
Mick, do you want to add anything?
We've decided to add some other things. I think an awful lot of the systems like yourself, right? You've seen the new age of where we're going with this. Again, like I talk up the community as a whole. It's not just about us, and it's certainly not a commercial. I appreciate you saying that. But at the end of the day, I know what our competitors do in this space, and what we're trying to get is for everybody, right? Is to get to an actual cost, what it is. So like when there's idle time on CT imaging, or there's idle time on infusion pumps, or there's idle time, what is that actual justification of cost that goes back to what Jim is doing, not just for risk quantification, but overall cost quantification then, right? That all of that kind of melds together, that you're getting the best bang for your buck on what you're doing with the tooling that you acquire, right? And I agree with them. It's not uncommon that you find, we have application level data when it comes to things. If I see that there are DLLs or EXEs that haven't been touched in 6 months, why do you even have those, right? Why is that application or that technology even in existence? It should be out of your environment, right?
Hey, thanks. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so I'm going to call it. This has been Security and Efficiency, Cyber Resilience Strategies for the Future of Healthcare, a webinar with James Bowie, the CISO at Tampa General Hospital, and Mick Coady, the CTO at Armis. Thank you, fellas, for being here today. You guys are quiet.
No, thank you. I didn't know if you were waiting.
Thanks. Yeah, we didn't know what you were carrying up with, but thanks for having us, Trix.
And
Very
thanks
much so.
to everyone who joined us today. We appreciate your questions and your participation. And again, thanks to Armis who made the whole thing happen. We appreciate the incredible relationship that we have with your team. I'm Drex DeFord from This Week Health and the 229 Project. Once again, thanks for being here. And it's cybersecurity, so stay a little paranoid, and we will see you around campus. Thanks for listening to this week's keynote. If you found value, share it with a peer. It's a great way to discuss the issues and in some cases, even start a mentoring relationship. One way you can support the show is to subscribe and leave us a rating. That would be really appreciated. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.